Either or by Soren Kierkegaard. The immediate stages of the erotic or musical erotic. Man's essential idea is spirit, and we must not allow ourselves to be put off by the fact that he is also able to walk on two legs. Shadow graphs. It is of the essence of joy to reveal itself, while grief tries to hide, sometimes even to deceive. Joy is communicative, social, open-hearted, and desires expression. Grief is secretive, silent, solitary, and seeks to retire into itself. The truth of this remark will surely not be denied by anyone who has even a moderate acquaintance with life. There are men so constituted that under the stress of emotion, the blood rushes to the surface, making the inner emotion outwardly visible. Others are so constituted that the blood flows backward, seeking the inner parts of the chambers of the heart. A somewhat similar reaction exists as to the mode of expression between joy and grief. Sometimes, when you have scrutinized a face long and persistently, you seem to discover a second face hidden behind the one you see. This is generally an unmistakable sign that the soul harbors an emigrant who has withdrawn from the world in order to watch over secret treasure. And the path for the investigator is indicated by the fact that one face lies beneath the other, as it were, from which he understands that he must attempt to penetrate within if he wishes to discover anything. The face, which ordinarily is the mirror of the soul, here takes on, though it be but for an instant, an ambiguity that resists artistic production. An exceptional eye is needed to see it, and trained powers of observation to follow this infallible index of a secret grief. This eye is eager and yet so solicitous, anxious and compelling, and yet so sympathetic, persistent and shrewd, and yet sincere and benevolent. It lulls the individual into a certain pleasant languor, in which he finds an almost voluptuous pleasure in pouring forth his grief, like the pleasure said to accompany blood-laying. The present is forgotten, the external is broken through, the past is resurrected. Grief breathes easily. The sorrowing soul finds relief, and sorrow's sympathetic knight-errant rejoices that he has found the object of his search. For we seek not the present, but sorrow, whose nature is to pass by. In the present it manifests itself only for a fleeting instant, like the glimpse one may have of a man turning a corner and vanishing from sight. Only he who has been bitten by a serpent knows the suffering of one who has been bitten by a serpent. The unhappiest man. The unhappy person is one who has his ideal, the content of his life, the fullness of his consciousness, the essence of his being, in some manner outside of himself. He is always absent, never present to himself. But it is evident that it is possible to absent from oneself either in the past or in the future. This, then, at once circumscribes the entire territory of the unhappy consciousness. For this rigid limitation we are grateful to Hegel. And now, since we are not merely philosophers beholding the kingdom from afar, we shall, as native inhabitants, give our attention in detail to the various types which are implied herein. The unhappy person is consequently absent, but one is absent when living either in the past or in the future. The form of expression must here be carefully noted, for it is clear, as philology also teaches us, that there is a tense which expresses presence in the past, and a tense which expresses presence in the future. But the same science also teaches us that there is a tense which is a plusquamperfectum, in which there is no present, as well as a futurum exactum of an analogous character. Now, there are some individuals who live in hope, and others who live in memory. These are indeed, in a sense, unhappy individuals, insofar, namely, as they live solely in hope or in memory. If ordinarily only he is happy who is present to himself. However, one cannot, in a strict sense, be called an unhappy individual now is present in hope or in memory. That which here must be emphasized is that he is present to himself in one or the other of these forms of consciousness. We shall also see from this that a single blow, be it ever so heavy, cannot possibly make a man the unhappiest of all. For one blow can either deprive him of hope, thereby leaving him present in memory, or of memory, thus leaving him present in hope. Crop rotation. Idleness, then, is so far from being the root of all evil that it is rather the true good. Boredom is the root of evil. It is that which must be held off. Since boredom advances, and boredom is the root of all evil, no wonder then that the world goes backwards, that evil spreads. This can be traced back to the very beginning of the world. The gods were bored, therefore they created human beings. Adam was bored because he was alone, therefore Eve was created. Since that moment, boredom entered the world and grew in quantity in exact proportion to the growth of population. Adam was bored alone, then Adam and Eve were bored en famille. After that, the population of the world increased and the nations were bored en masse. To amuse themselves, they hit upon the notion of building a tower so high that it would reach the sky. The notion is just as boring as the tower was high, and is a terrible demonstration of how boredom had gained the upper hand. Then they were dispersed around the world, and just as people now travel abroad, but they continue to be bored. And what consequences this boredom had. Humankind stood tall and fell far, first through Eve, then through the Babylonian tower. To forget, this is the desire of all people, and when they encounter something unpleasant, they always say, if only I could forget. But to forget is an art that must be practiced in advance. To be able to forget always depends upon how one experiences actuality. Married people pledge love for each other through eternity. Well now, that is easy enough, but does not mean very much, for if one is finished with time, one is probably finished with eternity. If instead of saying throughout eternity, the couple would say until Easter, until next May Day, then what they say would make some sense. For then they would be saying something, and also something they perhaps could carry out. Never take any official post. If one does that, one becomes just a plain John Any Man, a tiny little cog in the machine of the body politic. The individual ceases to be himself in the manager of the operation, and then theories can be of little help. One acquires a title, and implicit in that are all the consequences of sin and evil. The lore under which one slaves is equally boring, no matter whether advancement is swift or slow. A title can never be disposed of. It would take a criminal act for that, which would incur a public whipping, and even then one cannot be sure of not being pardoned by royal decree and acquiring the title again. There are men who have an extraordinary talent for transforming everything into a matter of business, whose whole life is business, who fall in love, marry, listen to a joke, and admire a picture with the same industrial zeal with which they labor during the business hours.